Hi, I'm Sean Sederberg, and this is Behind the Wings. In this episode, we'll get an inside look at the Century Series fighters.
3 Century Series strike aircraft.
You ever flown an airplane, Lieutenant?
No, sir.
The Century Series defined an era of aviation during the Cold War, charting a course from one era to another.
First of the Supersonic fighters.
Jets were in their infancy, and many milestones, including the sound barrier, loomed large.
Welcome to Supersonic pilot training.
Morning, sir.
In an arms race with the Soviet Union, a rising superpower, the U.S. got to work developing a variety of impressive fighter jets known as the Century Series. It's time to go behind the wings.
I'm Chuck Stout. I'm the curator at Wings Over the Rockies Air and Space Museum. As soon as we started developing jet fighters, we knew that we wanted to build something that would go faster than the speed of sound. So the sound barrier was first broken by Chuck Yeager in 1947. Manufacturers started trying to figure out immediately how they could build a supersonic production airplane, an airplane capable of exceeding the speed of sound in level flight. We recognized that the Soviet Union would be a major threat to democracy. We had nuclear weapons and they didn't until 1949. So as soon as they started exploding nuclear weapons, then it became the Cold War. In the late 40s, early 1950s, we realized that the biggest threat now would be Soviet bombers coming over the pole carrying nuclear weapons. So the first efforts towards building supersonic fighters and interceptors were to take out nuclear bombers coming from the Soviet Union. Because of the Air Force numbering sequence of their fighter planes, the first supersonic fighter happened to be the F-100, hence the beginning of the Century Series.
The big punch of the Tactical Air Command is made up of these 3 Century Series strike aircraft. All can deliver nuclear or non-nuclear weapons. The North American F-100 Super Sabre, first U.S. Air Force fighter to fly operationally at supersonic speed in straight and level flight.
My name's John Stewart. I joined the Air Force in 1966, and I went to F-100 training school at Luke Air Force Base. Graduated from that and went directly to Vietnam in October of 1968. I had gone to high school overseas at Wheelus Air Force Base, and so I'd seen an F-100 when I was in high school. When we'd go to lunch, they'd be at the officers club and you'd see the pilots hanging around and you thought, this is really something. And then 8 years later, I was flying one. The first time I flew the F-100 was quite a thrill. The first time I soloed and got in an airplane with only one seat, no one in the airplane, and lowered the canopy, and I said, here I am flying what at the time was one of the most iconic fighters in the Air Force. The people that flew the F-100s were hardcore fighter pilots. They lived on the edge. It just had an image of a big, bad machine. You had to be completely in charge of the airplane to fly it and survive. And so you looked at these people as almost demigods of aviation. Almost the first day in F-100 training, they showed us a video of one of them, the early models that did what they call a Sabre dance, and it ended up crashing. It was at Edwards Air Force Base. And they talked about the challenges of flying this airplane and the characteristics of this airplane when it gets slow, and the fact they drilled into our head that you must understand how to fly it, or you'll be one of those people that does a Sabre dance and you won't live through it. The flying of it, it was very heavy, 38,000 pounds maximum weight. It had low performance unless you had the afterburner, and the afterburner gave 60% more power.
Okay, got the burner. That's a good light.
It was a very responsive airplane once you got up to about 300 miles an hour. Before that, it was a little sluggish at slower airspeeds. The F-100 had a worldwide reputation as the first fighter aircraft that would go supersonic in level flight.
Unveiled in 1953 was the first of the supersonic fighters. Fighters capable of operating regularly above the speed of sound.
Prior to that, all the supersonic flight had occurred in taking the airplane up to 40 or 50,000 feet and going in a steep dive and going supersonic. During training, we'd go out and accelerate it, go through Mach 1. And then when you got back, Northrop gave you a pin. And so that was cool. The airplane, when you went Mach 1, you hardly knew it. There'd be a little change in the feeling of the flight controls, because when you go supersonic, the pressure on the airplane changes dramatically. You said, well, here I went supersonic in the first airplane that went supersonic in level flight. You felt like you were in a special group of aviators. Like the space race, we were in a race in the nation, and the people that were developing airplanes were trying to improve the airplane's performance.
Now from experimental labs and drawing boards, there came yet another aviation miracle. The jet.
Before that, in World War II, except for a few German jets, there were just prop planes. And so the transition from propeller planes to jet airplanes was just taking place when the F-100 came in.
After many years of study and research, jet-powered aircraft was a reality. More powerful than any plane previously conceived, the jet opened up a new vista in aviation progress.
And the shape of the fuselage was part of the technology, and a lot of it was experimental. They didn't really know what was going to happen until they got the airplane and tested it. The F-100 started the series, and each one they were trying to go faster and faster and faster and have more combat capability as they went through the Century series.
Okay, we get it. These fighter jets are super fast, but how exactly do sonic booms work? Next, we'll hear from Camille Calabeo to learn a little more about sonic booms.
The Century Series fighters were some of the first planes to reach supersonic speeds. But how do sonic booms work? Imagine you are walking down a crowded sidewalk. You are walking at a decent pace, faster than the other people, but they have time to react and move out of the way for you. This analogy applies to subsonic flight. You are the plane, and the people around you are the air molecules the plane is trying to move through. The air molecules have time to react to the plane coming and can move out of the way for it. Now imagine that you are in a big rush. This time you are moving much faster than the other people, and they don't have time to react and move out of the way for you. This analogy applies to supersonic flight. Again, you are the plane, and the people around you are the air molecules the plane is trying to move through. The plane is moving much faster than the air molecules can react, which means they don't have time to move out of the way. The supersonic plane in this instance causes a shock wave because the air molecules have compressed and built up a lot of pressure, just like you would compress the people in the crowd if you were running and pushing through it. Shock waves look similar to wakes created by boats, except that they are three-dimensional cones that extend all the way to the ground from the front of the plane. On the ground, a sharp release of pressure occurs and creates what is called a sonic boom that you would hear whenever the plane passes over you.
Development was very fast, and progress was going at an astonishing rate. At the same time that North American was developing the F-100, McDonnell was developing the F-101, and Lockheed was developing the F-104, Convair was developing the F-102.
The year 1957 was an increasingly active one for the F-102 flight test program.
The F-102 was intended to be supersonic, but during its initial test flights, it was subsonic. That was very disappointing because they did everything right. They did everything according to the rule book.
The first jets were tubes with the intake in the front and the exhaust in the back, and you would attach wings and fuel tanks to it and a cockpit, and away you would go. When we started getting to the point of pushing the Mach, going Mach 0.9, 0.95, 0.97, you'd run into a wall. Drag profile would go way up and the thrust profile wouldn't change. That was what was called, for many, many years, the sound barrier.
Now, at the speed of sound, it forms a dangerous wall of shock waves known as the sound barrier.
It was not a barrier at all. It was an aerodynamic problem.
Meanwhile, in another part of the country, NASA had scientists working on aerodynamics. One of them, Richard Whitcomb, had been studying the area rule for years.
When you start approaching the Mach, you would get huge drag rise over those wings. This guy found out that you really needed to have the profile that looks like this, including the wings. So to do that, they took a big piece out of the fuselage called the Coke bottle effect. And that would give a total profile going through the air of a fairly sleek design.
When you look at the old-fashioned glass Coca-Cola bottles, they start out narrow, they get fat, then they get narrow again, and then they get fat again. And if you look at supersonic airplanes, there's always a narrow part where the wings stick out from the fuselage. And usually the tail gets a little bit wider behind that. So that's the Coke bottle that everybody talks about.
The F-102 wouldn't even come close to going through the Mach. They changed it. They put some big doofers on the outside of the engine in the rear. They changed the intake design, which was up front. And then they took a big chop out of the fuselage to give it an area rule. Then they found out the thing went supersonic just fine with the same engine.
The Century Series exemplified an era of rapid development, fueled by the military tensions and resulting demands of the Cold War. The U.S. government approached manufacturers, simultaneously producing a variety of aircraft, each with their own unique characteristics and capabilities. Next, we'll take a look at the Lockheed F-104 Starfighter, a single-engine supersonic interceptor aircraft that was used extensively during the Cold War and eventually saw widespread manufacturing and use outside of the U.S.
When I got into the Air Force, I decided I had to be a fighter pilot. That's how I got into F-104s. It was on the heels of the Cuban crisis in early 1963.
The F-104 is a tower in the sky from which men can keep vigil over their homeland.
The Lockheed F-104 Starfighter was designed under the same design team under Kelly Johnson, who was also responsible for the P-38 Lightning in World War II and for the F-80 Shooting Star, which was our first operational jet fighter. So when he approached this point defense interceptor problem, he and his design team, the Skunk Works at Lockheed, went for simplicity, lightweight, and a very efficient design.
Kelly Johnson came up with the Starfighter, and we called it the High Fasty. The high, faster airplane would win the battle. And what would it do? Go high and fast. Once you did that, you better head back home because you're out of gas. And you better not try to turn real hard or you'll fall out of the sky. It took a big piece of airspace to make a 360-degree turn.
You'll notice that the wings on the F-104 are proportionally very small compared to the wings on other airplanes, and they are designed strictly for supersonic flight. That means you have to get them going really fast on the ground before you can even take off.
The F-104 went supersonic on its first flight. It was always fast. It carried very little fuel and had a great big engine and was very pointy. So it was easy to go fast. 104 was a basic airplane. When we were flying the thing out of Homestead in those early days, we didn't even have a navigation system in it. We just go out there until we sort of passed over a little set of islands that we knew. That was sort of where the line was between Cuban territory and the U.S. territory. That was about the most complex system that we had. We had sort of a super squadron at Homestead. We had 26 unit equipment airplanes, and we could scramble from wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning to the sound of a horn, and it would go, and we would come awake, run out the door, run to our airplane, get in, start up, and be airborne in less than 3 minutes. I have gotten airborne and been going through 10,000 feet when I'm saying to myself, come on, Charlie, wake up, you're flying now. And that's the way you feel sometimes when you're scrambled in the dead of night. We scrambled on some very interesting things. Sometimes they had an idea of what it was or who it was, but most of the time is we get airborne and we're on the way out to take a look. And that happened the time that I intercepted a nuclear submarine. Nobody knew who it was.
Field of radar, which will search out unknown aircraft long before they reach U.S. borders.
But it was clearly a nuclear submarine on the surface. Was it friendly or not friendly? In this case, it turned out to be a British submarine coming into Cape Canaveral. The typical air defender says, when you make your intercept, get type and numbers and color. I'd say big, black submarine with 3 numbers. Submarine's not going very fast, and the slowest I can fly is 180 knots, which is pushing 200 miles an hour, going, and well, I'm going to have to come back around again. I didn't quite get the numbers that time. But that's how you get to intercept a submarine.
F-104s gained a reputation as being widowmakers. They were dangerous to fly. They had a high accident rate compared to other airplanes, even other really high performance airplanes. The good news is, boy, is this airplane sexy. And the Air Force recognized that and used it a lot for their recruiting. They would show an F-104 doing aerobatics and steep climbs while an announcer read the poem by John Gillespie McGee Jr. called High Flight. This video inspired a whole generation of pilots who were maybe 6 to 10 years old when they saw this on TV.
As a young kid growing up, I saw High Flight before I got into the Air Force Academy. When they would say the poem, I was all set to go fly this thing. Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and flown on laughter's silver wings.
Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds and done 100 things you have not dreamed of. Wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through
that was my motivation. And the fact that I ended up getting to have a long tour in the Starfighter was just magic.
Hearing directly from these pilots, we can only begin to imagine the full experience of flying these remarkable machines. Being at high altitude at supersonic speeds and alone in the cockpit is something that most of us can only dream of, something that pilots can only describe as magic. Next, we'll hear from Charlie Johnson, who flew the Republic F-105 Thunder Chief.
A pilot's tour of duty is 100 missions.
100 missions to be flown, 100 targets still unknown. But it's my belief that my Thunder Chief strikes a telling blow to help G.I. Joe. Till 100 missions I myself have flown.
My name is Charlie Johnson, and I had the privilege of flying the F-105 1969, 70, 71, and 72. I have been a fan of airplanes all my life since I was 3 years old. I believe in motivation, and I've never been motivated to do anything other than be a fighter pilot. The 105, to me personally, is a machine you truly connect with. It was, in my estimation, the epitome of airplanes in its time. Carried more, did more, just a tremendous machine.
And this is the Republic F-105 Thunder Chief.
At the same time that the other Century Series fighters are being developed by other manufacturers, Republic Aviation in New York is developing the F-105.
Screeching through the clouds at Mach Plus, these F-105 Thunder Chiefs are bent on destroying the enemy's ground potential.
The F-105, although it's got an F for fighter designation, was really designed around the idea that it could carry a nuclear weapon internally and deliver it supersonically. Nevertheless, it became a superb air-to-air fighter, and it was mainly used for ground attack during the Vietnam War.
.105 development rumors started in 1951, started getting serious in 1958. Almost everybody that ever flew it in combat. You really start to identify with the power, the magic of the airplane. And when I went to pilot training at that time, if you were first in your class, you could pick any airplane in the inventory. And the 105 was all I ever wanted to fly since I was in high school. So I had the good fortune of knowing a lot about the airplane, watching the development, watching it go into service, and then when I graduated from pilot training, being selected to go to F-105 training. Have always felt that there was never a finer fighter built. One of the interesting things about flying fighters is that you have to be very competitive. And there is an attitude in fighter pilots, and it's kind of an invincibility almost. And you're pretty much convinced that if anything happens, it's never going to happen to you. If you walked into a room with 100 people getting ready to go out on a mission, and whatever you believe in stood up on the stage and said, 99 of you folks are not going to come back today, everybody would stand up in the room and walk out and say, it's really sad that all those other people aren't coming back today because I am. And there is always the element of risk. The people that are concerned about hurting themselves in a fighter don't last in a fighter. They generally will quit or wash out. It's driven by attitude. It is driven by incredible training. There's not an emergency or a system or a thing that can happen in that airplane that the pilot doesn't know about before you take off. So you're trained to handle whatever happens.
The two-seat F&G models were used in extremely dangerous missions called wild weasel missions, where they would go out and try to protect other American airplanes by attracting surface-to-air missiles. They would fly over and mimic an attacking force of American airplanes, get the North Vietnamese radar to lock onto them so that they could see where those radar sites were, and then they would attack them with anti-radiation missiles, anti-radar missiles. The problem with that is, by the time you find out where that radar is and lock your missiles onto it, they've launched missiles at you. And so it's extremely dangerous. You're purposely drawing their fire and getting them to shoot at you, and then hoping that you can get out of the way of those missiles that are already airborne, or get to the radar before they can launch the missiles.
They found the 105 was the absolute ideal airplane for that. They built an F model, which was 2 seats. They converted those to put all the electronics warfare equipment in the back. We equipped them with standard arms, which was a very, very lethal weapon. The Weasel's total job was to fly ahead and behind the strike force and to keep the missiles heads down. Republic has always had an interesting design philosophy. It was overcoming weight with power. We literally had to refuel within 20 minutes of takeoff. We'd take off lightweight and then refuel, and then we'd refuel again going into the target. Most missions had at least 3 refuelings, 2 going in, 1 coming out. I had one where I was doing a search and rescue air cap that I had 11 refuelings. So they plug the boom down and give you some gas and you keep going. There's nothing I would love more than for somebody to fuel up on 105 and go jump in it right now. If I could go back and do anything in life, let me go fly one more four-ship, let me go fly one more flight. So a lot of lessons were learned from the airplane. Evolutionary is the right word, because every piece of the airplane, the way that it works, the redundancy that you build into the airplane is all a result of losses in machines like the Century Series fighters. Each of the fighters that you see and each of the Century Series fighters have contributed tremendously to the fighting force that we have right now.
We look back at the 1950s and the Century Series as a time of enormous growth in aviation technology. Anything was possible, and development was happening at a lightning pace. We still see the legacy of the Century Series in the aerodynamic profiles of modern-day fighters. Avionics, automation, and intelligence make today's fighters safer, faster, and more effective than ever before. The Century Series was a part of that trajectory, but what the future holds, we will have to just wait and see. This program was made possible by Wings Over the Rockies, educating and inspiring all people about aviation and space endeavors of the past, present, and the future. Hi, I'm Sean Sederberg, and this is Behind the Wings. In this episode, we're exploring the Learjet legacy.
Okay, we finished the turn, now climbing straight away.
For nearly 60 years, the Learjet came to define a new class of luxury aircraft, the business jet.
No other business jet can fly that high.
Now, the final Learjet is being assembled at the Wichita-based production facility in the aviation capital of the world.
Learjet on a world record-setting flight.
From its record-setting performance achievements to its outsized role in popular culture, the Learjet's place in history is here to stay, long after the production lines have shut down. It's time to go behind the wings.
Bill Lear was an entrepreneur based in California. He wanted to build a small jet airplane. His board of directors at California said, no, we're not going to do that, so he resigned. He goes to Switzerland. His son, who was living in Switzerland at the time, said that there's a small fighter bomber called the P-16, which is being built here in Switzerland, which the Swiss are not going to buy. And Bill Jr. said, I think this could be the platform for a small jet airplane.
One day I got a letter from Switzerland and said, Don, if you want a job, I have one over here for you. You can be head of the technical group. Cessna at that time, I was very disappointed because we were building the first business jet over there. And Dwayne Wallace came in one morning and said, nobody can afford a business jet except the military. And the military aren't interested in what we're doing. So they came in and canceled the whole project. After that, I said, if anybody's going to build a business jet, that's where I'm going. I had a wife and 4 children at the time, and they stayed here, and I went to Switzerland. And when I got over there, I didn't like what was going on. I tried to talk to these people, and they didn't like the Americans coming in there. And so you'd walk in and they'd lay down on their desk and cover what they were doing so you couldn't see. I tried to supervise them, and those guys would sit there and they were reading magazines. And one day, one of the guys that could speak English, I said, why do you guys just not work in here? And he says, well, we make drawings in ink, you know, and we have to take time, and we make a line, and then we have to sit for a while and let that line dry. Holy cow, we're never going to build this thing here. So Bill Lear finally said, okay. And so he went looking, and I told him, I said, if you come to Wichita, we know a lot of engineers, and it'll be easy to get them. Finally, he came to Wichita.
After the FFA P-16 Swiss fighter jet drew Bill Lear to Switzerland, he soon realized that Wichita, Kansas was the place that Learjet needed to be. The workforce of engineers was there and ready to go. With a big vision and a lot to prove, Learjet made the move to Wichita.
Wichita was founded in 1871, and for about the first 40 years was known primarily for agriculture, a little bit of meat processing, and small businesses. In the early 20th century, oil was discovered in this part of the state of Kansas, and several people made a lot of money pretty quickly toward the end of World War I. So the flyers got together with the oil people who had the money, who provided the resources to allow that to happen. And at one point in the 1920s, there were more than a dozen different aircraft manufacturing facilities in Wichita, Kansas. Another reason why Wichita is this center is we are very flat out here. So if your airplane had trouble, it was not a big deal to land the airplane as opposed to trying to find a mountain range to go through and then land. We have a large number of flying days, so that's important to have good weather when you're flying, particularly in an experimental airplane. And finally, we're basically in the middle of the U.S., so that delivering an airplane to either coast was not a big deal. So a lot of factors kind of coalesced to provide the genesis of Learjet, which in 1928 got the name of the air capital of the world because of the great number of small airplanes that were being built here.
The very first business jet, when everyone told him it can't be done and no one will buy them, and the perseverance, he stayed in it and kept it going. And then to build it to such an iconic brand is, I mean, overwhelming. How they did this, you know, in the times that they actually did it in. The technology and the workforce and the skills, and they developed that in Wichita, Kansas.
Bill Lear was a visionary and a jack of all trades. He was an inventor, an engineer, and an entrepreneur. According to those who knew him closely, working for him was an exercise in controlled chaos. Learjet moved quickly on its mission to create the world's first business jet.
Learjet showed up in the 60s, but in 1958, the Boeing 707 had just come out, so people were actually being ferried around the country on jet airliners, and Bill Lear came to Wichita, and he said to the combined Cessna and Beechcraft people, if you guys don't build a private airplane that's a jet airplane to compete with that 707, I will.
Bill Lear was clearly a visionary, the greatest visionary I've ever been around and spent much time with. He was everything that anybody has ever heard about. He was irascible, he could be a son of a gun, he could be warm, he could be kind, he could be funny, he could be generous. So he was all of those things all wrapped up. Somebody always asking me what was it like working for Bill Lear. And I said it was a number of years, the best years of my life that I wouldn't particularly want to go through again, because he would fire somebody on Tuesday and hire him back on Wednesday. So it was a lot of fun to be around. But he was just a guy who saw things before anybody else saw things, and he was ahead of his time.
Bill Lear was a genius. He dropped out of school in the 8th grade. He was 13 years old. He's pretty much on his own. He was an orphan very early, and he came up with an awful lot of stuff. He was a self-trained engineer. He had a lot of great ideas.
Bill Lear was an incredible visionary. He had a fire in his spirit. And, you know, people would tell him that these inventions were never going to happen and he couldn't do it. But Bill never gave up, and he pushed those limits. One of his favorite quotes is, "They said it couldn't be done, and it was."
Engineering was his long suit. That's where he spent most of his time. Engineers talk about coming back to work in the morning, and they might have this blueprint they were working on, and he'd be drawing all over it, and you'd see a WPL signature on it where he told you what he wanted to change or asking you questions. And the engineer said, you know, if you thought about it, he was usually right. That he could just see their drawing and have an idea and improve it. So this was a guy with an 8th grade education. So a pretty amazing story in itself.
Well, Bill Lear was a very interesting guy. He was a real genius and a really interesting person to know. Had so many things on his mind all the time and things he was interested in. Not one thing, but not even a dozen more.
To ride with Bill Lear in the airplane was an experience. Number one, he was type-rated in the airplane at the age of 62. And if he was in the airplane, he was in the left seat. He flew. And if you were in the back, it was not unusual for him to back out of his seat in the left with a screwdriver in one hand and maybe a pair of pliers, dragging cable down the center aisle where the other people were tinkering with something. It never amounted to a problem, but it was a little bit disconcerting if it was your first ride in a Learjet.
Bill Lear came in at 5 o'clock one day and said, "We're going to fly the airplane tonight." And holy cow, the airplane was ready to fly because we had taken it out and taxied it, but we didn't have a lot of the systems in it yet. I remember one of the guys that was going to fly says, "We need parachutes," and we didn't have any, and Bill Lear said, "Well, what do you need a parachute for? You bring that airplane back here. I don't want you jumping out of it."
They said, "It's ready." Hank and I climbed in, taxied out to runway 14, fueled it up, and I took it off, got it up a few thousand feet and started wiggling it around a little bit. We come back around to land. Cars were lined up all along K-42 with their lights on.
All our skeptics are out there.
Yeah, the word got around, I guess it said on the radio that the Learjet is flying. One of the best sights I've ever seen.
Got my video camera and took a shot of it taking off and landing, and those videos are still around today. You know, they made the first flight, everything worked fine, the gear came up and went down. It was a great day. Landed without incident. And I remember Bill was so excited, the next day he says, "We've got to get this airplane painted and we're going to have a big press conference." So some of those you see, those flights you see now, I took off that little 8mm camera and flew right over the top of the building here.
Learjets set a standard right away. I mean, literally, if you were to look at the movie of the first flight of the Learjet flying over the factory, they made a low pass. And it was so fast it was almost hard to follow the airplane. And it maintained a tremendous record for capability, set speed records, set altitude records.
As the first Learjets took flight, the brand name and its role in popular culture were quick to follow. From high-profile celebrities to Hollywood movie appearances, Learjet had an unconventional yet highly effective strategy to make the Learjet name synonymous with the term business jet. Surprisingly, it worked.
Very definitely, Bill Lear's vision was to have the name Learjet become synonymous with the term business jet. That was the charge to his public relations people, of which I was one.
The Lear company really worked hard to roll it out, and it became a household name. When an airplane was flying over, people would say, "Oh, there goes the Learjet."
It really caught on. People would see any private jet flying, they say, "Oh, look, there goes a Learjet."
They think of a Learjet.
Everybody knew the Learjet, even if they weren't in aviation. Being out in the Hollywood area, Bill said to me one day, "Look," he said, I want to take this company public one day." He said, "I want all the publicity we can get." He says, "Take the phone book and anybody in Hollywood you want to fly, just fly them."
I had the privilege of flying a Lear 24 with Arnold Palmer. Well, Arnold Palmer is a tremendous athlete, natural athlete, tremendous pilot, tremendous person, and the Learjet fit his personality. Go someplace fast and enjoy life.
Elvis Presley flew in one on his honeymoon. The Byrds, a musical group, had written a song about the Learjet. Carly Simon talked about the Learjet. Frank Sinatra had one.
With Frank and his friends, it came Dean Martin, Sammy Davis, Peter Lawford, things. And so I flew them around a lot early when the Lear was a new airplane. They loved it, and they helped promote the airplane.
Learjet wasn't just making waves in pop culture. It also set a host of performance records. From time to climb to speed and high altitude records, Learjet used its fighter jet roots to push the limits of performance. Many of these records still hold today.
Early on, the Learjet got the nickname of the businessman's jet just because of its high performance, flying from sea level to 40,000 feet in 7 or 8 minutes, which is Air Force fighter performance. Its speed of 560 miles an hour. It's an airplane that looks like it's flying 500 miles an hour standing on the ramp. Just the sleek design of the airplane.
It's always trying to stay ahead of the competition, trying to be at the fastest, the highest, lowest operating cost, time to climb records, distance records, speed records, which the airplane is within its envelope was capable of doing.
It was the best airplane because they had the most performance, the most speed, ability to climb. And a friend of mine, Jack Conroy, we were talking, and I said, why don't we fly to New York back in the Lear? And so we did. It went off really nice. We took his kids along. Flew from Los Angeles to Wichita, refueled. Bill Lear was there, and his wife, Moya. And we flew to New York and had lunch with Jack Dempsey. And then we flew to Tulsa and refueled and back to Los Angeles. It set a record that still stands, by the way, for that size aircraft. 10 hours and 52 minutes. We got there well before sunset. Jack's boys had baseball games that night, little league baseball. And we got back in time for them to make their games at 6 o'clock. Little Lear was just a great airplane. It'd do anything you wanted to do. So it was a great day.
Learjet was certainly an innovator when it came to creating the business jet as a new class of aircraft. However, they also innovated on many other features that helped improve the plane's performance. You may have seen those little tips on the end of wings. They're called winglets, and Learjet was one of the first to experiment with them. Now we'll hear from Camille Calabeo to learn more about winglets and exactly how they work.
How do winglets work? Some airplanes have wingtips that stick up at an angle. These are called winglets, and they do a lot of work to ensure airplane flight is as efficient as possible. Learjet was one of the first manufacturers to experiment with winglets on their production airplanes. As an airplane flies, the air under the wings is at a higher pressure than the air on top of the wings. This is what generates the lift that keeps the plane in the air. But at the tips of the wings, the high pressure air from the bottom bleeds upward into the low pressure air on the top. This actually creates mild tornadoes of swirling air behind the wings that cause a lot of drag. Overcoming drag takes a lot of energy, which means it takes a lot of jet fuel. So we want to decrease drag as much as possible. Winglets help us do this. They decrease the size of those little tornadoes behind the wings, thus decreasing drag and the amount of fuel needed. But why is this important? First, jet fuel is very expensive, so the more fuel a plane needs, the more expensive an airline ticket could be. Winglets reduce fuel consumption by approximately 4 to 5% per plane per year. This might not seem like a lot, but winglets on a Boeing 767, for example, reduce fuel consumption by over 500,000 gallons per plane per year. They also dramatically reduce carbon dioxide emissions. So for a Boeing 767, this equates to reducing carbon dioxide emissions by nearly 5,000 metric tons for each plane every year.
As far as designing and building aircraft, I think we were years ahead of a lot of our competition. You know, our technology was there. We, constantly invested in the future, tried to stay up with the changing times.
We had an advanced design department that was always looking at the scene outside. You know, there's a market niche here, a market niche there, and do we want to go after that? And if we want to go after it, can we get in one of our airplanes to fit that? And that's how the evolution would take place. You'd find a need and you'd go fill that need and try and do it better than the competition.
As Learjet established this new class of airplane, the business jet, competing aviation companies including Cessna and Beechcraft took note. For all of Bill Lear's genius, Learjet was a relatively small company and low on cash. Changing consumer preferences towards larger jets and an increase in competition would prove to be another challenge for Learjet. With the newly established market and a new demand for business jets, the competition came, and it came fast.
As Learjet was emerging, there were 3 or 4 other aircraft being developed about that same time. So there was this race to be first, race to be the most, be the best. Because of the synergy of these various corporate jet models, at a time when the propeller airplanes were flying 150, 250 miles an hour, the corporate jets just plain took over. And this is now basically a corporate jet industry. There are still propeller airplanes flying, and they do a very good job, but the glamour, the pizzazz of business aviation remains in the corporate jet, and Learjet has to be in the forefront of that. It was the first, it was the most glamorous, it was the most talked about, and sort of set the pace, I think, for the industry to follow. Others have done a lot of great work. In the meantime, Cessna has delivered more corporate jets than anybody else, and they're all made right here in Wichita as well. But Learjet, I think people would give it the consensus was sort of the trendsetter.
The Learjet factory here was delivering about, right before the downturn, about almost 70 Learjets a year. After the downturn, that fell, and then there were some other things going on at that time. A lot of competitors came into that space, and there was a lean toward the mid-size and the larger jets. With Learjet and Bill Lear, they quickly ran out of money, so they sold to Gates, and then they sold to an investment firm, and then Bombardier bought them in 1990, kind of out of financial distress.
Learjet was obviously purchased by Bombardier. It was something of a distressed product at that point. Bombardier made a good purchase, and they ran the company through the 90s in a pretty aggressive fashion, lots of R&D money invested and so on. But in later years, 2 things happened. Bombardier expanded the airplane products they had. We had the Learjets, and then they had the Challenger line, and then they started adding a stretch Challenger that they called the CRJ. That particular model took off, and they built hundreds of those airplanes for all sorts of airlines. Regional airliners, and for that matter, major airlines, buy their airplanes in fleets. So you had production that was stretching out years. I think it spread the situation at Bombardier so thin that they had to start looking at ways to consolidate.
It's been a struggle for almost 60 years, and it looks like the end is about to come here in 2021, and it's too bad because it is the end of an era. The industry will go on, it will continue to thrive and succeed, but without the Learjet brand as emerging as one of the preeminent airplanes being produced and delivered.
It makes me really sad. It seemed like everybody that owned the place, they were always seemed like a short on cash, you know. So you struggled. I saw such a great future for this company.
Sad for us to learn this year that Bombardier had made the decision not to continue to make Learjets. They still have a few on the assembly line right now, and they'll continue deliveries through the end of this year, 2021. But Bombardier made a decision internally that they just weren't selling enough of them to keep the production line going, and they are really focusing on the larger airplanes where they make a lot more money and so forth. I suppose it could be resurrected at some point. We're sad to see it, but there's still thousands of Learjets out there in the world that are flying and serving their customers every single day. They have been used extensively in air ambulance transport. And that particular airplane that we had and operated for a number of years that sits in front of wings now was used early on in the air ambulance business to carry people who had a serious injury or had a life-threatening type of illness and needed to get to Denver, Colorado, maybe from an outlying place to get higher level of care. They still prove to be a very viable airplane even in today's world with the economics that we all face. 40 and 50 years old that are still flying every single day.
The Learjet legacy will always live on and retain its name as the cachet of the world's first private business jet.
It set the standard for performance, for speed. That very first little seed that Learjet planted has grown into all the business jets in the world right now. Learjet is the granddaddy of all of them, and it's just a tremendous performing, wonderful little airplane.
The production side is going away, but Learjet isn't going away.
The support of our service center to bring aircraft back in. Our operators absolutely love the plane, so bring them back in, refurb them.
The team is very engaged, and they're all in. They're, they want to, kick all the way to the end and build the last unit.
Even though they will stop making Learjets brand new at the end of this year, I think will continue on for many, many years. That Learjet name and Learjet legacy that Bill Lear started back in the 1960s is still felt by all of us today.
An icon of the industry, a pace setter in the industry. It created a whole segment of the marketplace.
I can't imagine my life without the Learjet. Important time of my life, learning the business, learning how to conduct myself as a professional, and to be at the center of the business jet industry with the leader of the business jet industry, it was just almost too much to hope for, and we had a great time doing it.
Even after the last Learjet rolls off the assembly line, the airplanes and their impact on aviation remain. From Bill Lear's vision to create the first business jet, to its rise in popular culture and record-setting performance achievements, Learjet forever shaped the landscape of modern-day aviation. Learjet production may be shutting down, but its name and its legacy are here to stay.